Welcome to the Charity Changemakers podcast, your weekly dose of inspiration and action for the changemakers of the world. Each week, we dive deep into the world of impactful charities. We connect you with the passionate leaders, the innovative ideas, and the real-world stories that are making a difference. Whether you're a seasoned non-profit professional or just starting out, this podcast is your chance to learn from the best and get fired up to make a positive change. We'll explore the challenges and triumphs of running a successful charity. We'll hear about the fundraising strategies, impactful programs, and the stories of the people whose lives are being transformed. But most importantly, we'll leave you feeling empowered and equipped to take action in your community and the organisations in which you work. So, buckle up, Changemakers, because we're about to embark on a journey of inspiration and impact.
Today on the Charity Changemakers podcast, I'm joined by Catherine McLeod, who's the Chief Executive of Dingley's Promise. Catherine shares in this conversation a real grit and determination and focus that she's had from a very young age to want to make a difference through her career and working within the charity sector. From setting up her own charity out in Asia to coming back to the UK and working within the charity sector here, and then taking Dingley's Promise on quite a journey where she's been chief executive for the last 9 years and really exciting plans ahead. Catherine shares some wonderful insights through this conversation, which I think you'll find really inspiring and really helpful. So with no more to come from me, let's get on and meet our changemaker. Well, I'm really pleased to be joined by Catherine here on the Charity Changemakers podcast. Thanks, Catherine, for coming along.
No worries.
Yeah, good. And how are you today?
Yeah, all good. Lots of changeable weather, and just wishing for a bit of summer to come along now.
Yeah, that's right. Indeed, the rain's persistent this year, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely. Good. And we like to start these podcasts off with some quick fire questions. Jump straight in there. Give the audience the opportunity to get to know you a little bit today. So flying straight in there. What's the best place that you've ever visited?
I'd have to say Sigiriya in Sri Lanka, which is a big rock temple, and you have to climb up the side. Absolutely terrifying, but amazing.
Yes, right, okay. Presumably some amazing views once you've got there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's great. And quick fire number 2, what are you reading at the moment?
I've just finished The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. So,
Yes.
all about life and, destiny and all the rest of it. So I've quite enjoyed that, yeah.
Yes, yeah, brilliant. That's great. And away from the pressures of work, into our final quickfire question, what do you like to do to relax?
As many silly things as possible. So I love all things sort of related to drag. I love dressing up. I love I love music, concerts, all that kind of stuff. I love to have things planned to just be really silly and just laugh. And that gets me through everything else, I think.
Yes, yeah, no, that's brilliant. Oh, well, maybe I should have asked you what your most recent concert was rather than that you attended rather than what you've been reading recently.
Yeah. And now you're asking me, I can't actually remember. I've just seen someone. I saw Jamiroquai last year, which was amazing because I didn't see him back in the day. It was really good.
Yes.
Yeah. Oh, Madonna. Yeah. I just saw Madonna.
Oh, blimey. Yeah, no, you can't forget that.
No, that's a big one.
Yeah. And I've heard an incredible show.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, no, that's brilliant. Good. And here on the Charity Changemakers podcast, we love the opportunity to explore with people their route into charity sector and how they've ended up in the position that they're on and the journey that they've been on. So reflect on those early days or that route into sector. It'd be lovely to hear about how that sort of flourished and happened for yourself.
Yeah, I think it was mostly linked to disability that brought me into the charity sector because weirdly, when I was about, 7 or 8, I think I had a friend who lived in a house that was next to a home for children with disabilities, and she had a rabbit. And so she would say, let's take the rabbit over to the home for the children. They can play with the rabbit and we can go into their ball pool because, of course, that was amazing, which is obviously therapy, but for us it was fun. And we would go in there, and I remember going back to my parents and just saying, like, that's not right. Why are those children in that place and they're not with their families? And that's where it started. And then I started volunteering in school still and did sort of play schemes and all that kind of thing, support children with disabilities. And then went overseas and volunteered, and that volunteering also was in a home for children with disabilities. So disability, certainly learning disability, has always been one of the things that has inspired me and just made me want to make a difference. And so that's how I got in, really.
And what was your first, I guess, pay role within the charity sector then? Was that, I mean, have you always worked within the sector?
I have. Yeah, I've always worked in the charity sector. So after the volunteering, I went back and finished university. And then after university, I went straight in with VSO, voluntary service overseas. So that wasn't really paid either. And I went overseas with them to Vietnam, because my whole life I'd wanted to work in Vietnam. And I suppose, to be fair, the first proper paid role was when I set up my own charity lies. Actually, I managed a volunteer program in Sri Lanka on behalf of a British organisation. And so that was probably my first properly paid role that wasn't actually me volunteering. I was managing the volunteers. And then I set up my own organisation in Sri Lanka called EXUT, which stands for Equality-Based Community Support and Training, and still exists, still running in Sri Lanka. We're celebrating 20 years next April the 1st.
Incredible.
So that's how I sort of came into it. But it was weird because I was overseas for so many years. I didn't come back to the UK until 2011. And how old was I then? I don't know, God, approaching 30 or whatever. But at that point, I didn't have any sort of the normal qualifications that other charity leaders had, and it was actually quite hard at that point to get back into the charity sector, because I think I looked like a risk. I didn't know health and safety, I didn't know safeguarding, none of it, because of course I hadn't gone through that in the UK. All of my learning was overseas.
Yes, yeah. And we'll dive into that. But I suppose it's interesting. It seems like there was always that intention from, or maybe there's a rabbit that was responsible for this, that intention to get in you, always that intention to work in the charity sector, which I think is quite rare. Most people kind of fall into the sector or just suddenly find themselves within it, or an opportunity that arises.
Yeah, I mean, my poor parents, I think literally when I was about 10, I said to them, I'm going to set up a charity and support children with disabilities in Asia. And I said that to them at about 10, and they said, oh yeah, okay, whatever. And then it just kept building, and that is what I ended up doing. And I think weirdly, when I got to my 30th birthday, so it must have been before I left Sri Lanka, I literally had that feeling of I've done everything I wanted to do, which sounds really arrogant. I don't mean it that way, but I was like, oh my God, what's my aim now? Because I had the charity, it was all set up, we were doing what we were supposed to do. I was like, oh, I'm 30, I should have some new life goals now, and I just didn't know what to do. So I think that was probably my midlife crisis. It was really early.
Went early. Yes, yeah. So talk me through that journey then of going out to Asia and to finding a charity, starting a charity, and what that looks like, and blimey, how you fund something like that, how you put that out. I mean, it's very easy to say it in a sentence. Oh yeah, I went to set up a charity in Asia, but I mean, it's complex, right?
It is, and I think that sort of not being a local as well is quite difficult, because obviously what I didn't want to do was go in there and sort of say, look, okay, I'm a foreigner coming in, I know what you need, I know what your people need, and I'm going to do it. So when I did go in, I started working for a Sri Lankan organisation for quite a long time. And what I was aiming to do, because I didn't really want to start my own one, what I wanted to do was to get that organisation, because it ran homes for children and young people with disabilities. And what I wanted to do was to get them to move sideways to say, let's support communities and families instead, so they can actually stay in their communities. They got it, but they weren't going to change. And so I sort of learned a lot through being there, and I did a big organisational development programme with them and sort of worked through what they could do. But in the end, actually, it was a donor who wanted to give to them, but was worried about the fact that it upheld institutionalisation. And I was against that as well. And so he said to me, look, if you go and start something new, we'll fund you. And I was like, ooh, okay. And in hindsight, it was a tiny amount of money. And if I'd known that, I might not have started it. But so I then started it. And what you also have to know is that at that time, the tsunami hit in Sri Lanka as well. So we were in the setup phase and then the tsunami hit. So it was a really strange period, because obviously we were looking at disability and inclusion, and then suddenly everybody, because we were going to set up in Gaul, which was heavily hit by the tsunami, and
Right.
everybody suddenly was a beneficiary, and everybody needed support, and everybody was looking for someone to help them. So I remember doing interviews with people who, all of whom were traumatized. There was we needed staff, and people wanted to work, but also they were trying to deal with the things that had happened, and it was a really intense time. And when I look back on it, I don't really know how we managed to get through it all. But in the end, we ended up with a team, with a building. And of course, we did get funding because it was a tsunami affected area. So it made it easier when we set up to get quite a significant amount of funding to make it happen. But I think the thing I'm really proud of is that now, 20 years on, I left in 2011. So that's a long time ago now. And it's still running. And the guy that I put in place as the chief exec to take over from me, he's still there. And, and it's thriving. And I think the funniest one was, it was really hard to get the permission to set up the charity, because I was a foreigner. And although I speak Sinhala and I was married to a Sri Lankan, they obviously just saw me as a white person. And so I'd go into the government offices and be like, hi, so it's been 5 months now, and we're still waiting for that piece of paper to be signed. Yes. And they were just like, yeah. And obviously didn't want to do it because I was a foreigner. And so one day I took in my son, who at that point was 2 months old, I think, 2 or 3 months old, took him into the offices, and was sitting with this guy, Douglas Nanayakara, his name was, and he sat there, and I was talking to him in Sinhala, so, showing him I was in a way local. He still wasn't doing it, and I was like, sod it. And so Sam, my son, he was like chuntering a bit, and I was like, oh, hang on, Douglas, this is awful, really culturally inappropriate. Hang on, Douglas, got my boob out, decided to breastfeed the baby, and he immediately went, oh my God, yeah, it's approved, so-and-so, get it done, it's signed. And that's what made it happen. So
yeah, that's right. Indeed. Where does that determination, that persistence, that I'm going to, at all costs, I'm going to try absolutely everything, where does that come from?
I've always been the same, and when I get something in my head, that's what I'm going to do, then that's what I'm going to do. Very, very focused. I think it's interesting looking back and looking at my dad's influence on me, because he was fairly similar, I think, and he was sort of born very working class, and nobody expected much of him at all, in Dartford in London, and he ended up working his way up through companies, and then became the CEO of the company, and then joined a much bigger company. And him and I always talked about business, and he didn't have any sons, and so I think we had that sort of business focused sort of relationship. And I think that's probably helped me to be the way that I am.
Yeah. I mean, the number of conversations that I have with individuals that can, refer back to things in their childhood or their growing up, that impact that it has, and the influence that people that have surrounded them in those early formative years, is crucial, isn't it? It's always interesting. But I think it's at this point in our lives where you look back and reflect and realize that might not have seen that in, I guess, your early 20s when you're out there doing it and setting things up.
Well, I mean, as you know, my dad died last month, and it's really interesting because when you look back, we were sort of like putting everything together for the funeral. I was like, oh God, yeah, he was really charitable. Oh, he used to do loads of challenges. He used to dress up all the time. And it's just stuff that I didn't really think about when I was a kid. But obviously now I think, well, of course that would have been normal for you, because that person who you were living with was doing that all the time. And I just it didn't really click until literally about 3 weeks ago. So
yeah, absolutely. But it's like you say, it's in those moments of reflection, isn't it? And and obviously the changes that that happen through life that make you look back and appreciate the positive influence that parents or family or close family friends, what it is that have on there, and that drive. And I think, Catherine, in many ways you're very unique in that, like I say, in that sense of there was always that drive to be in the charity sector, which I just I think is absolutely fascinating. But that focus and determination, I think, obviously has been that trajectory that you've seen across your career. So talk me through about that transition then back to the UK, and what that looked like.
Yeah, that was tough. That was much harder than leaving the UK, because I think when you come back, people assume, well, you know everything, you're English. And it's like, yeah, but I've been away for 15 years. I mean, it's not a
Yeah.
short time I was away.
No.
And so people don't really understand how different it is. So, I mean, from the very basics, like I almost had a panic attack in Asda because there are about 300 types of shampoo. And I was with my mum a week after I got back, and she's like, choose a shampoo. And I'm like, oh, there's too much. I can't do it. Because you're so used to just whatever's there, just take it off the shelf in other countries. But yeah, so there was the basic stuff like that. But I think professionally, it was really difficult because in Sri Lanka, which is where I was for most of my time, I was on television talking about disability and inclusion and supporting children, and people knew me and I could pull strings. Wow, I came back to England. It was me and my son came back. I left my husband in Sri Lanka. And so it was like new start. I was back living with my parents again, which is really tough as a sort of 30-year-old. And yeah, I started to realise just how much of the real basics of what people do in the UK in work I didn't know. I really didn't have a clue about a lot of it. And so in the end, I did apply for some bigger jobs with bigger organisations and things that linked to international development, because I thought, well, I've done that. I mean, in Sri Lanka, I'd worked for the UN and I'd done lots of different training programmes and, good stuff. But I think I was probably too much of a risk for employers when I first got back, because they just thought, well, she's not tried and tested. She, it was her own charity. She could have been doing anything really, which is true. I could have been.
Yes.
So I ended up taking a really local job, and I took a sort of, there wasn't a CEO role, there was sort of like a leader role at my local MenCap. And I'd always wanted to work for MenCap when I was young, because of course the whole learning disability side of things. But I didn't realise the difference between main MenCap, the big national organisation, and the little branches that are actually just franchises. Literally, they sign to have the logo and everything else they do themselves. And I didn't realise that. So I went there, and I was there for a few years, and just really, again, just doing the things like the health and safety training and the safeguarding training, and understanding how employment law works in England. I mean, I didn't have a clue. I'd never worked in England at all. So it was a really strange situation to be in. And then after a few years there, I realised that I did grow it. I grew it quite significantly, but I just looked at it and thought, there's a ceiling here, and I can't do more than that. And so I thought I needed to move on, and also to have a CEO role again. I wanted to get back into that role. And that's when I saw the Dingley's Promise role online, and thought, that's probably a good shout.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And that's what, 9 years ago or so? Is it 9 years that you've been chief exec now at Dingley's Promise? And again, that's. I mean, we'll dive into that in a bit more detail, because that's quite a long tenure for the sector, right? Because we see. I don't know. It's difficult to put an exact number on it, but I would say probably people in director or senior, chief executive type roles in position for sort of 5 to 7 years, and then moving on. But it'd be lovely to hear. Clearly you've been there. The organisation. It'd be lovely to hear about the organisation that you walked into, and compared to what it is now. But tell us about those early days at Dingley's Promise.
Yeah, I mean, when I got the role, it was clear that they needed to change in certain ways, but I was told everything is ready for growth, and we need to grow, and we need to reach more children. And in some ways that was true. So what was happening on the playroom floor, so we run nurseries for children with disabilities, and we also, well, that's all we did at that point. We had 3 nurseries in Berkshire, and they didn't link up very well. It was quite separate, and it didn't feel like one organisation. It felt like 3 organisations that were linked. So when I came in, the board very much said, we're ready to expand, and we want you to grow it, and all this kind of thing. And I have to say, I think I'm glad that we took a real pause and sort of said, why is it that we're doing what we do? And one of the first conversations I had with them was around inclusion, and just to say, look, wherever children can be included, they should be. We're a specialist early years provider. Where does this organisation stand on inclusion? Obviously, that scared the bejesus out of everybody, because they were sort of like, oh, well, if inclusion comes in, then we have to close down. And I was like, well, not being funny, but if inclusion did come in and everybody was included, I would be happy if we closed down, which I later learned was probably not the right thing to say. Because everybody freaked out thinking I was trying to close them down. But yeah, it was really difficult, because what we had to do was really look at a mindset change, because I was coming in and there was a real feeling of, we're brilliant at what we do. We were, and we still are, in the playroom. But what was around that? Why are we doing it? How are we supporting families with their confidence and to move on after us? I was told by a manager, oh, we're brilliant at what we do. I said, okay, how do you know we're brilliant at what we do? Well, because parents tell us that when they leave us, it's like falling off a cliff. I was like, oh.
Yeah.
Oh God,
Yeah.
So I know that it was a lovely little model in the centre, but I could see it needed to be really, really thought about why we did it, and then to think about the influence we could have to actually complement inclusion. So that's when we released a statement on inclusion, which I really pushed for. And in that we said it's using specialist early intervention to build wider inclusion. And that's what we said. We lost people. And to be honest, I just sort of said, that's fine. If people don't sign up to this, that's probably not the right organisation for them, because that's the direction we're going in. I had somebody on the board who absolutely despised me, and for the first 6 months tried to get rid of me. And that was really hard, because I think they all assumed Catherine's dynamic. Catherine's going to move on in 2 years, leave us in the dust. And, they just made that assumption, because I am dynamic. As you say, I'm very focused. And once I'm doing something, I'm going to do it. But I think they were worried she's too dynamic for us, and she's just going to do a little bit of tinkering and then go and move on to a bigger organisation. So at the 6-month board meeting, the person who really couldn't stand me pretty much said to the board, she goes or I go. And they said, okay, goodbye then. And so she left. And at that point I passed my probation, and then it calmed down a little bit. And I think people then knew the direction we were moving in. But it took, I would say, 4 to 5 years to get the whole organisation to really be comfortable with change, really be comfortable with the fact that we are wider than just our centres. And we introduced training in 2018, which was 3 years in. And again, that's now national. And we have a role now which is very, very different to what we had when I arrived.
And you think that's all driven from that instilling that mission focus? It sounds like from very early days to say, no, we're not drift. This is who we are, and this is what we've got to do, and this is how we're going to deliver it. You quite often hear about people saying, I'm going to take 6 months to get to know an organisation, but it sounds like you were straight in there having to implement change.
Yeah, I did. Obviously, I wanted to understand who the organisation was. One of the issues was there wasn't much written down. And so literally people could hardly tell me anything about the history. We've got like one A4 paper on what the history was before, 2010 probably, even though we're now 41 years old. So there's a long history, but there weren't records. And I just think that when I looked at what the organisation was, the board was very much behind me looking at it and saying, okay, what do we need to do to grow for the future? And what do we need to do to be ready to expand and help more families? And that was their bottom line. How do we help more families and children? So what I would say is I think very quickly as well. I'm not saying I'm the cleverest person, but I think really quickly. And I don't make decisions without considering the different alternatives, but I do quite quickly make sense of situations and I can quite quickly see what direction I think would work. And then what I did was I just worked really carefully that whenever we were creating a strategy or a new angle, we'd, take it into all the centres, talk it through, people could give their ideas, and really sort of try and take those ideas to create what it was that we needed to do.
Yeah.
But I suppose, in all honesty, I was pretty clear within four to 6 months that the direction we needed to go in as an organisation. Yeah.
And how easy was it to bring people? Because you say you think quickly, which is brilliant, and obviously a really key skill to have. But the charity sector isn't predominantly known for the speed at which it can move. Although maybe there's more flexibility in a smaller organisation as you were then. But equally, there's buy-in from, like you say, a lot of stakeholders, beneficiaries, board of trustees, staff, team. What was your approach to it? Bringing people on the journey, or as many people as you could on the journey?
Yeah, I think I do recognise that not everybody is as comfortable with change as I am, and I am very comfortable with change. I love it, as long as it's having a good impact. But so I think that there was a lot of discussion, there was a lot of workshopping things, but also what I would say is I also did too much of that at one point, and I did start to get some feedback of, like, honestly, the teams just want to do their jobs now. Like, they've told you what they think. They know there's going to be change. Can you just get on with it now? And I was like, okay, good, right, fine. I'll get on with it. Because I think if anything, I probably overdid the consultation, because I didn't want people to say, well, she's just come in and doing what she fancies, because that's not right. But at the same time, I just think that there's a level to which, because obviously you have different level conversations with different people. And when we were talking with the teams in the centres, there were things that were really important to them. They made those clear. And it was almost like second or third version. They're like, seriously, we've talked about this. Can you just get on with it now? So that was quite helpful, because it sort of gave me permission to say, okay, I will. And then what I also make sure is that when we do new strategy or work around what we're going to do in the future, that we always create sort of A4 sheets that can just be stuck up on walls, and people can just see it around them, and they feel at least that they're a part of it. And that was really important. With the board, I'm lucky. I've always had a fairly open board who are quite comfortable with risk. And there's been risk. There was risk in recruiting me, because when they recruited me, I think the turnover was about £350,000 or something, and I think my salary was about 40,000. And I had a fundraiser leave saying she wasn't going to fundraise for a CEO's salary. So it was sort of, they had consulted, and they just said, you know what, we need to take this risk. We need to invest in this before it's going to bring in the dividends, because actually, unless we invest, we're never going to grow in the way we want to. But I have to say, I don't think they quite realised how much we were going to grow when they brought me on.
Yes, absolutely. And the journey, which has been extraordinary, and particularly, when we reflect on the last few years, and the growth that there's been there, and the platform that you've developed off. I mean, you've done that during a global pandemic as well, right? Where services in local authorities have been heavily hit. So it'd be great to hear more about that journey and what that's looked like as well.
What was really interesting, that when the pandemic did hit, I'd already been in for sort of 5 years. And so the organisation was really comfortable with fast change. And even external consultants who came in to do some review of what we did said, wow, we thought it was just you saying that you're happy with change. But actually, we spoke to all the levels, and everybody is quite comfortable with change, which is rare in organisations. So I think we had that before the pandemic, but also because our training programs were online, we were already using Zoom and all those kind of things. And so most people were going, what's Zoom? What are we doing, when the pandemic hit? And the second it hit, obviously we had to adapt all of our in-person work. When it was very first happened, the first few weeks, everybody had to go home. And of course, our centres were closed as well. But what I did in that period was immediately say to my training team, right, I want you to adapt our training programme, because it was a 4-month long NCFE accredited level 3. I said, no,
Right.
let's do a short course, which is an introduction to early years inclusive practice. It won't be accredited, but let's see if anybody's interested. Why not? Because they're all sitting at home. They can't go to work. And at that point, bear in mind, we were a little local charity,
Sure.
and we put it out and we got 767
Yeah.
sign-ups
Amazing.
in a month from across
Yes.
England. And we went, oh
Yeah.
God, right, okay. We managed to deliver those, we did. But I think that's where we changed the model of the training. And we wouldn't have done that without COVID. So from
Yeah.
that point of view, it did that for us. With our program on the ground, because we're early years providers, we did carry on throughout the pandemic, whereas most
Yeah.
charities closed down, didn't they?
Yeah.
Sort of
Yeah.
their bases, and maybe they had some
Yeah.
online work, but it was very different. So I actually believe that the pandemic has in some ways gotten us to where we are today, because not
Yeah.
only did we keep working, and I mean, we got a lot of funding that year, so that sort of helped us to support lots and lots of families and children. We expanded our family support program, which had been there but quite small before, so it wasn't just the
Yeah.
sessions in the centre, but family support became much bigger. We used digital much more, and we've continued
Yeah.
with a lot of that. So it's sort of it grew us in that way. But also I think what was really key as a CEO, I before that just wasn't able to represent my organization in lots of meetings and sort of national activities, because you had to travel to go and do them.
Yeah.
And then suddenly the pandemic meant I could just zoom in, and suddenly I'm on boards at the Department for Education, and I'm, supporting in a national coalition of disability like it was just bizarre. It just all
Yeah.
exploded. and
Yeah.
and really there is no other organisation that just focuses on early years send, and that's why there was a gap, and that's why we grew so fast. And the
Yes.
pandemic allowed us to do that because we were already really responsive, really flexible, and not afraid of change.
Yeah, yeah, and that obviously that culture you've been able to instill in the run up, obviously to pandemic,
Yeah.
but then that transition from being small local charity to suddenly have an opportunity to speak on a national level. So from there, what opportunities have opened up for Dingley's Promise over the last few years?
It was really exciting. We got a comic relief grant to deliver our training across the country. So we've now got 14,000 learners on our courses across
Yeah,
England, which
yeah,
is which is
yeah, which is
mad. But
incredible.
yeah, and we're raising that to 30,000 by the end of 2026.
Yeah,
Um, and I think that while the training itself is brilliant, what it also did was it made people say, ooh, Dingley's Promise are the experts. Because, of course, if we're
yeah,
training across the country, we're seen as experts. So it's also helped with everything else that we do as an organisation. So sort of a year and a half ago, we had those 3 centres in Berkshire.
yes,
Since then, we've opened another 3 centres. So we've doubled the number of centres. We've now got 6. We're expecting probably another 6 this year. And we're
wow,
expecting to go up to 25 centres by the end of our current 5-year plan. So
yeah, okay,
really, really fast growth. And again, the opportunity is there because people now understand what we do and why we do it, because they've
yeah,
seen, the training, they've seen me in a conference, they've seen us lobbying, because we're really
mm,
vocal and present now. Local authorities say, hang on, that looks incredible. We want one of those in our area. So
yeah,
for me, the conversation with local authorities has always been, we're not a charity that wants a donation. We are a partner to you, and you need to pay us as you would pay any other business partner. So all of our
yeah,
new centres are fully funded by local authorities, because I just cannot open more and more centres and increase the amount of fundraising we need to do as an organisation. So
yes,
yeah, that's where we sort of are now. And I think with the lobbying as well, we launched our manifesto in the House of Lords in November, and
yeah,
it was one of those moments when you go, my word, like think of where we were even 2 years ago, let alone the 8 years
yeah,
ago when I started it.
yeah,
And it already has had an impact, and we know that the Labour team are looking at it when they look at their policies if they come into power in the next couple of months. We know that Conservatives have mentioned us in Parliament and said, we're working with Dingley's Promise to make this better. I mean, that's just crazy. But, that's where we are now.
Yeah, and testament to the work that's been done over the last 8-9 years in getting there, and the work that's taken place.
Oh, and what I also should say is COVID. When you asked about COVID, I think that for me, the biggest change in my head was before COVID, I was doing what you said earlier. I was going, oh, well, I've been here 4 or 5 years now. Everybody tells me in a charity career, I need to move on and go to a bigger organisation in London. And then I think COVID just made me go, oh, God, do I really want to go to an organisation in London and all that pressure and travel and all the rest of it? And I thought, actually, no. And I sat there and said to my family, I was like, I'm not going to leave Dingley. I'm going to grow Dingley to become the organisation that's the next step on my development pathway. And that's what we've done.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what's fascinating and worth exploring is the fact that that platform work and all that you were doing in those your first 4 or 5 years with the organisation actually had unlocked that potential for the organisation, and actually much of that would have been lost if you left and someone else comes in and then they're resetting up. But a lot of organisations don't get that because you see people moving in the sector a fair amount.
Yeah, I think it depends on how much freedom you have in an organisation. If I didn't have the freedom I'd had in Dingley to really grow it and move it forward, I would have left for sure. But I think because of that freedom and the success in our growth, it's all the time I'm having to learn new things. Like, oh my word, right, how do we raise a motion in Parliament? And how do we... It's all new. So actually, I'm not getting bored. I'm sure there'll be a point when I know most of the things I'm supposed to be doing, but it's definitely not yet. And I definitely see a number of years still left at Dingley's Promise for sure.
Yeah. I mean, particularly with the what you're planning over the coming years and where you want to get to the organisation. So there's definitely no time to get bored, Catherine. Definitely not.
Lots to do.
And I wonder within that, so you think about the culture that you've instilled in the organisation, and an organisation that's happy and prepared to change. But obviously, with new centres come new staff, come new people. Your back office facilities, I'm sure, and fundraiser. You've got to grow the team to help support the organisation. How do you continue to instill that positive culture across the organisation, and I guess have that sort of, this is the Dingley the Dingley way?
Yeah. To be honest with you, that's probably the biggest worry that I have, is just about how to manage the growth so that we remain Dingley's Promise and we remain who we are. Because one of the new centres I haven't visited yet. And I mean, I've been there when it was setting up, but I've not been there since it's been running. And those are the things that make me a little bit uncomfortable, because I know it's not all about me, but at the same time, I never want the teams to think, oh, well, she just flounces around in Westminster and she doesn't even know what we do in the centre. I mean, I don't know it in the level they do, but I do want to know all the people who work with us. So one of the things I always do is I say, when we've got new staff, you need to put a date in the diary. I'll come in, and whoever's new, I'll bring coffee and cake, and we sit down and we chat, and I talk about this stuff. I talk about where Dingley's come from, why it's exciting and all that kind of thing. And we just have that chat and obviously get to know them and why they've come to Dingley. And so, even when we've got 25 centres, I still do think to myself, well, we may need to clump people a lot more, but still, I don't want to lose those sort of connections. But I, in the latest version of our strategy, we had a board day in December, and we looked at all of the targets for the next 5 years, and we created, the 25 centre target. And again, it's sort of, people are really excited when they hear it. There's not sort of a, oh God, really? Because I think the difference is for the centres, their centre remains their centre. And even if we have 100 centres, they're still going to be doing what they do. And so it sort of insulates them from feeling like, oh my God, how are we going to cope? The flip side of that is my central team. And again, I really worry about well-being, really worry about it, because I'm committed, everybody around me is committed. And I don't ever worry people aren't doing enough. My biggest worry is people doing too much. And I have to keep saying to people, like, you need a balance. We need to look after you. How can we do that better? And we always have those conversations, because I recently brought in a chief operations officer, which was great, because now he oversees all the centres in a way that I used to have to do. I mean, God,
Yes.
3 or 4 years ago, it was me and a finance manager, because the fundraising manager had left and it was just the two of us doing the whole thing. So now we're much bigger centrally. We've also brought in a quality manager, and the exciting thing now is the people who are joining us are really excited about growth and development, because they're coming into our organisation because of that narrative that's around Dingley's Promise. So that is really amazing. And I think the people we've brought in recently are really fantastic and will drive the organisation further. And I spend a lot of time with the central team. We all meet every week. And so it's just about making sure that, that excitement and the progress we can make sort of drips down through them into all of the different areas of the organisation. But yeah, it does worry me. And I know that a couple of years ago, somebody said, "Oh, Dingley used to be like a family. Now it's like a business." And I was like, "Oh!" That's my nightmare. That's my nightmare, because it is a business, and it has to be, and we have to have systems in place. But there is a Dingley way. There is a heart to it. And if we lose that, then we've lost why we started doing it in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And with your central team then, are you office based or working hybrid, remotely? What does that kind of look like?
Well, to be fair, we're all over the place all the time, to be honest. The only thing we do is to make sure we remain like a team is I'm quite strict about saying every Wednesday we all meet. And so this week we're not, because it's half term. But normally every Wednesday we all go to the Hilton in Reading, because the Hilton in Reading, we're their charity, so they give us free space. We love that. And
brilliant. And
we
definitely
go
worth a
there.
shout out.
Yeah. Thank you, Hilton Reading.
Yes.
And we just go there and we just spend that time. Yes, we have specific meeting points and we have an agenda, but also it's just those bits to go, I wanted to catch up with so and so and have a chat and have a coffee, and it just helps us to feel like we're an organisation rather than feeling isolated, because we do a lot of lone working, a lot as a central team.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's, as you move from, like you say, you move from a small local organisation to working nationally now, I suppose having that openness means that you can recruit from much wider as you grow that central team to support, obviously, the growth of the organisation. And hopefully better talent that comes forward.
Oh, absolutely. I think the really exciting thing about recruitment is because of the reputation of our centres as well. When we open new centres, we tend to get lots of applicants for that, which is rare, because the early years sector is on its knees at the moment. It just can't recruit and there's not enough people. But we're finding, because people who are passionate about SEND know us, when we go into a new area, they're immediately on the door saying, "Hi, can we come and work for you?" So it's just everything as it's growing is complementing everything else, and it just means that it keeps growing.
Yeah, absolutely. Which is absolutely fantastic, and exactly how it should be. I mean, actually, we did a poll on LinkedIn fairly recently about why people want to work in the sector, and it was, overwhelming. Well over 90% of people, because they want to make a difference, and the fact that you can tell that story in your advertising and your, when you're going out to market, that people have already heard it before you're even opening a new centre, and knocking on the door is, testimony to the work that's taken place. I guess a lot of that comes from that initial openness from the board to take a risk, right? Not just in you, but also, at the end of probation to say, we're sticking with this route. We're going forward, Catherine, and the growth that's come from that.
Yeah. And I think relationships with the board is something that lots of CEOs talk about, and it can be difficult. I think it's really difficult when the board tries to get involved and manage the organisation, because it's like, no, your governance and your oversight, you're not here to to manage. There's been a few I think at the beginning it was quite hard, because before me there wasn't a CEO at Dingley's Promise, so the board had been doing a lot of the CEO roles, so that was difficult at one point. I think now what I really enjoy in a board is being challenged, but not just challenged for the sake of it, but really good constructive challenge where you go, oh my God, I never thought of that. Like, that's brilliant. And the more people like that I have on the board, the happier I am, really, because you know, I always want to be questioning myself. And if someone is questioning and suggesting new ideas in a constructive way, I love that. Absolutely love that, because it, you know, it stretches you. And I think sometimes you end up, if you're doing well, the board just going, oh yeah, you're doing well, well done. And that doesn't exactly motivate. So, and it is a fine balance. You don't want people just getting at you for no reason. But I think the best bit of the board is when they when they really question, and obviously they bring in their expertise and sort of work to stretch the CEO more and make the CEO think, oh God, was there another way to do it? That is interesting. And, you know, that's, I think, the greatest strength of a board.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you see organisations that hit that balance, those are the ones that have thrived through difficult circumstances like pandemic, cost of living crisis, you know, where they needed to change or to move. It's where you've got that, harmonious, is that the right word? I think so. A relationship between board and senior leadership team. Of course, there can be that check and challenge, but, you know, actually all driving mission focused and driving off in the same direction. So that's great, and maintaining that relationship. And where do you get your? Because look, people will talk about it can be lonely as a chief executive. I'm not sure that's always true or always the case, but of course you are managing upwards as well as across an organisation. Where do you? I mean, do you get peer-to-peer support, or where do you get your support, or when those moments where you just need to let it all off your chest? Where does that come from?
I have to say, I do have in recent years a very supportive senior leadership team, and that's something which obviously there's a fine line, because there are some things that you shouldn't really be sharing, but actually the senior leadership team now looks after me almost as much as I look after them, and that's a really lovely thing to have. And I think that comes from just being vulnerable, and I've always been very open to be vulnerable with everybody in the organization, and, you know, talking about mental health, all the rest of it, and just to say it affects CEOs as well as everybody else in the organization. Because I think sometimes CEOs go, we want to help you, and it's like, well, okay, but let's be honest, we struggle as well. My biggest support on a sort of business strategy side of things is definitely my coach. He's just brilliant, and he's a business coach. He hasn't worked with charities before, and really, really helps me by giving me structure to issues that I have. And he'll say, oh, have you tried this spreadsheet? And have you tried this? I'm like, oh, lovely. I love a spreadsheet. And I think that has really helped to keep me focused on the bigger picture. And I think that for me, that's the completely open sort of discussion that I can have. Because even with trustees, yes, they can support you to a point, but you still have to think as a CEO, what am I saying to my trustees? There's times when they'll say to me, oh my God, well, you know, I don't think it's an issue. And I think, well, no, I wasn't saying it was an issue. I just wanted to talk about it. So I've realised there are some things that are good for my coach, and I can talk them through with him, and it really works, and that I probably wouldn't talk to anybody else in the organisation about, because it makes them worry and think, oh my God, is Kath worried about that? You know?
Absolutely.
So coach you.
Absolutely. And I just think, having that, you know, having someone or someone outside of an organisation to be able to bounce ideas off, you know, can just be really, really helpful. Catherine, I'm so grateful for you coming on and sharing some of your story. It's been so inspiring to hear. If I can finish off with one final question for you and put you on the spot ever so slightly, if you're reflecting today and could go back and give your younger self a piece of career advice when you were starting off, what do you think you'd say? What nugget from your experience in the sector would you give to your younger self?
I think it would be around, it's great to be passionate, but be careful when you're having discussions that you feel passionate about, because you don't always have to be right, and it's probably good to listen to people. I think when I was younger, I was so focused. I was like, no, that's right, and that's what we're doing. And I think that took time for me to develop to be better at that. Yeah. So I wish I would have done that earlier, but I got there in the end.
Yeah. Although that focus and determination from a young age, from obviously visiting the home next door with the rabbit, and that clear determination and focus, obviously enabled you to do great things. Not only out in Asia, but what you're doing today. So it's absolutely brilliant. So I really appreciate you coming on and sharing with us. I mean, are you happy? I mean, as we put things out, we'll obviously tag you on LinkedIn. If people had questions or wanted to get in touch, are they all right to drop you a message via? I guess LinkedIn's probably the easiest way. Yeah, perfect.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we would love to do that. Yeah,
cool.
Great. Well, Catherine, again, thank you so much. It's been wonderful to catch up and to chat. And I feel like with everything that's going on, we're going to need to do this again. Maybe get you back on to hear how things are going. So,
yes, where we've taken over the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Indeed. No, that'd be great. Lovely. Thanks again, Catherine. We'll speak soon.
Thanks, Adam.
And that's a wrap for this week on the Charity Changemakers podcast. Remember, you can be the change you want to see in the world. We hope that this episode has inspired you to get out there and make a difference. This podcast was brought to you by Charisma Charity Recruitment, one of the UK's leading recruitment consultancies for the charity sector. Whether you're a passionate professional seeking your next challenge or a charity searching for a top-tier talent, Charisma Charity Recruitment can help. Visit their website at charismarecruitment.co.uk to explore their latest positions and to connect your organisation with the change makers shaping the future of a non-profit world. Thanks for joining us.